So have you ever been browsing the internet and wondering, should I get a fretted bass or should I get a fretless bass? Well, here's a fretted bass and here is a fretless bass. I'm also going to do something about that 5-string in the background there, and I'm going to tell you, do you want a fretted bass, a fretless bass, or that 5-string that's hanging around in the corner as a little bonus? So stay tuned, and I think you're going to learn a lot from this one, and hopefully this will influence your next bass buying decision and give you the right move for you. So let's get straight into it. So the first bass which we're going to look at today is this fretted bass, and you can see the main difference is on that fingerboard there. I'll give you a little bit of a zoom in. There are frets along all of it, and with the fretless you're not going to get it, and these frets are just the little metal wires that run along the fingerboard, and they essentially keep your notes in tune, and that is one of the main benefits of a fretted bass. No matter where you play along this bass, the notes are always going to be in tune as long as you've got your setup right in terms of the bridge and saddle and all of that, but that's not for today's video. All of your notes will play in tune. You don't have to worry about being like one of those violins that are constantly out of tune because they don't know where to put their fingers. You put your finger next to the fret, just behind the fret, and you get a perfect clean note that is perfectly in tune. And this is great if you're just starting out on the bass, as all of your notes are going to be playing in tune, and when you learn where to put your fingers on the bass, it is just great and easy to start playing. You don't have to worry about all the things you do on a fretless bass, because there are a lot of other things you have to hurdle around, such as intonation, whereas on a fretted bass that is not an issue whatsoever. Now also on a fretted bass, this could be good or not good for you. You have a higher action, and essentially it means your strings are further off the fingerboard than your usual fretless bass, because the frets are also in the way, and essentially they add height to the fingerboard, so you have to have your strings further away. This means you've got to press a little bit harder to get all of those notes out. But for some players, they love digging into their bass. For beginners, a low action is always the way, but on a nice Warwick like this bass, the action is really low anyway, and it's not much of an issue, and there isn't too much in it compared to my fretless Man Stingray. And this action is very easily playable, and I think it's not too much of an issue, but some people won't really like a low action because they want to really dig in. For you metal players especially, the force of you digging in is probably something which you're not going to be getting out of a fretless bass. Now another thing which is really crucial to any sort of fretted bass is any sort of slap like that. And now I'm not really any sort of a slapper. I was using down thumb technique, sort of a flea thing. Most people will up thumb when they're really getting into the stuff. I'm a jazz guy and I don't really slap. But if slap is your thing and you want that, the fretted bass is the way to go, because the sound of that slap comes from the string hitting the fret. And when you don't have a fret on your fingerboard, you don't get that same sound. It sounds a little bit duller on a fretless. It still can be done and still sounds nice, but slap does sound a lot better on a fretted bass, especially with some new nice strings on it. You can really get some nice sounding slap, which you wouldn't really associate with any sort of fretless bass. So the reasons for the fretted bass and why you'd want it is for that slap. All of your notes are playing in tune, and if you want to dig in a little bit more and have that higher action, that is another good thing coming from the fretted bass. In general, they're easier to play than fretless basses, and they offer any sort of sound which you're really going to need apart from the fretless sound, which is more specific. There is a much wider range of sounds that you can get from a fretted bass, and it is the widely accepted electric bass that you'll get. Basically all of them are fretted, and it is for a reason that they are most commonly used, and they are easier to use than any sort of fretless bass, which we'll see, and that's why they're great for beginners and just general session musicians. It gives you a great sound which is even across things, especially if you've got a P bass or a jazz bass. This is neither, but it's sort of a PJ bass in how these pickups are arranged, which is a sort of slightly odd thing in itself. But the fretted bass is the way to go for you sessioners or beginners, if you're just getting into bass, or if you like any sort of slap, rock, metal. Fretted is probably the way to go. So now we've got my personal bass of choice, the fretless Man Stingray, and I am saying this is the bass that I use, just because I might sound possibly a little bit biased, but I'm going to try and keep my bias out of it, as this is neutral and this is what I think you need to know about the fretless bass. Firstly, if you're a beginner, don't play this thing. Start on a fretted bass until you've learnt all your notes of the fretboard. You can check out my fretboard video on how to learn all the notes on the fretboard, and once you're playing all your notes in tune, then if you really want a fretless, then go for it. But your main issue is all of that tuning. You've got to make sure all your notes are in tune. All your lines are going to sound horrible. It's not all going to work out for you. And, you know, as a beginner, it just adds an extra hurdle in the way, and I don't think it is good for you beginners. So once you've got a little bit more bass experience under your belt, maybe you've been listening to a little bit of Jacko, a little bit of Pino Palladino in his fretless phase, and you're thinking, I want a fretless. And that is actually one reason for the both of these basses, just if you like the sound of them. If you're really into the fretless sound and it's what you want, then go for it. Again, not if you're a beginner. Once you've enhanced your playing a little bit, you've got some experience under your belt and you want that fretless sound, then go for a fretless. But you don't have to go for this exact Music Man Stingray. In fact, it's a little bit pricey, but you can get some much cheaper basses. Same with the Warwick as well. Not really a starting bass, although a very lovely bass, on the expensive side of things. But the good thing about the fretless, in my opinion, is its sound. It just sounds simply fantastic to me. I love all of those Jacko things, like the come on, come over bass line when you're going over like this. Like, it's a great bass line, and it's that fretless sound, and it is awesome. Again, it's really good for that jazz stuff. If you sort of want to replicate the sound of a double bass, then a fretless is a good way of doing that as well. Also, a lot of people play their fretlesses with flat wounds. If you don't know what it is, it's to do with the strings, and you know, they're wound with flat, they're sort of tape wound in a way, although they're different, and then round wounds are just round with wire. They sound different. Flat wounds are a lot more muted, but I personally really like a fretless bass, also a fretted bass, but I like playing with rounds on my fretless. This sort of eats up the fingerboard a little bit, but I think it adds a nice little extra kick to the sound. But you know, all of this glissando-y stuff is the main reason for your fretless playing if you want to get into it, because you've got that, just, I feel like it's in a way a bigger sound, or just a nicer sound in a way. I can't really describe it, but when you're playing a fretless and you're really going for it and it just sounds great coming through your amp, there's really nothing, in my opinion, that beats it too much. You've also got a lower action. I talked about this on the fretted bass. You have a higher action on that, and you're going to have a lower action on this, and that, in my opinion, makes it easier to play, and especially when you're playing quick, because I like to play really lightly with this hand and this hand, and playing lightly is really the way to play with the most consistency and fluidity, and generally get the best sound overall. Now, not too lightly that, you know, the notes aren't coming out on the string, or, you know, that your volume is just so low that no one can hear you, but just the perfect amount where you're really in the groove and you're getting all the notes out cleanly. The minimum amount of effort really required to get that great sound, and that is really how you should play bass generally, unless you want that really aggressive sound. Then you've got to dig in hard, especially with this hand. Not really this hand as much. This can still be really light. It's just tiring to play bass and have to put loads of effort into it, and I find you just have to put a little bit less effort into playing the fretless. I can play it a little bit lighter, and that is a really nice thing for me. And another thing which I just love doing, frankly, is harmonics. And I always find harmonics, for me, they just come out better on a fretless. And obviously you can do slide harmonics, which you can't do on a fretted bass. And all of these harmonics and just nice things, like all this Jacko thing, it sounds so great on a fretless. I know Jacko didn't play Portrait of Tracy on a fretless bass, but if you've got a fretless bass and you chuck some compression on it, it really can't be beat by a fretted bass with any sort of compression on it as well. I always just think the fretless stuff sounds better in that regard, which is why obviously I play it. And just one final thing along with the fretless as well, which I think really makes it my champion of a bass is that I find that the frets sort of get in the way on a fretted bass for me, and you sort of don't realize it in an extent until you're on that fretless. And especially if you're sliding or doing things quick, I often find I get stuck on the frets, and this is just me playing loads and loads of fretless because I've played this for quite a while now. On a fretted bass you get used to it and it isn't an issue, but especially if you play a lot of double bass as well, it can be an issue when moving to a fretted bass, and that is where a fretless really does come in nicely, as it acts that same way. And it's not like I have no markers. I do have dots along the top of the fretboard here, so I do pretty much know where I am, and you know, my fingers know where the notes are anyway because I figured it out and I'm using my ear to hear all of it. And they're all skills you have on the double bass as well. So a good thing is for me, that last thing is the frets don't get in the way, and especially coming from double bass stuff, it's easier to move over to a fretless bass than a fretted bass in my opinion. And just one last thing, this 5-string, as I commented, you got a little bonus at the end, and it's my opinions on 5 strings. Now I do not have a fretless 5-string or a 6-string for that matter, but we won't go into it. This is another really nice Warwick. It's a slightly later one than that 4-string, which is now back on the wall over there because I need to put another bass up there. Yeah, the 5-string, you can either have a high C or a low B. On this one I've got a low B, and I'm actually not sure if this is in tune. I don't think it is. But the point is, with the 5-string, I think for beginners it really isn't the way to go. And actually I'd sort of prefer if a beginner played a fretless than a 5-string, because this low B just adds extra stuff, and when you get into palm muting and string muting, it is really an issue with this low B because it just rings out. You don't even have to be touching it, and you can be playing other strings, and that low B is just going to ring out if you're not muting it correctly, and that is really an issue for beginners. Now, if you need just the notes down there, then you probably would like a 5-string. But I often find on a lot of 5-strings, not this one because it's a particularly nice one, on some cheaper ones, the 5-string is really flappy and doesn't give a good sound. So make sure you've got a good string on your 5-string. Well, it's not really the string, it's to do with where the tuner is placed and adjusted on the neck. It's really nice with this headstock design of 3 and 2 here. A lot of them have just a row of 5. Doesn't really work out so well for the 5-strings, so get a good 5-string, because usually the 5th string can be pretty lackluster on some cheap ones. If you need the notes down there though, and you don't have a 5-string, you can always drop your E string to whatever tuning, drop D, drop C, whatnot, or it does tend to be a little bit flappier than that B string. You also do have to buy different string sets when you get in this, as you have to get a 5-string set, which could be an inconvenience. And especially for slap as well, it's really not the way to go, as there's just another string getting in the way, and for slap, that's really not what you want. 4-string is the best. And all this is a really nice fretted Warwick, and it's a great bass to play. I wasn't playing it great there because I've just been playing a fretless. For me, it's not really what you want, especially for beginners. Well, it's not what I want, I'm not going to say. If you like 5-strings and you like those notes and you like the extra versatility you get out of a 5-string, then by all means get a 5-string. But I think for beginners, and really for most things, it's not a bass which you'd want. Obviously, I'm going to say the fretless is my favourite. That is the bass that I play, but I don't think it's for everyone, especially not for beginners, people into metal, rock or slap, because it's not really the way to go. And even for jazz as well, I think a fretted bass sounds really nice, but a fretless bass is my preference. P bass or jazz bass, what is the better one? Well, in today's video, I'm going to share with you the differences between a P bass and a jazz bass, and which one potentially is right for you. So we'll start with the OG, the P bass. This came out in 1951 and was designed by Leo Fender, and it's pretty much as basic as a bass can get, but is such a workhorse when it comes to playing. It has got such a recognizable sound, such a signature sound, and is used in as many bass recordings as probably you can think of. The P bass is by far the most widely used electric bass on any sort of recordings. It's only got one pickup here. Some have pick guards over. You get that sort of James Jamerson style P bass as well. But basically it's volume, tone and then simply you've got a jack in. It's as simple as the bass can get. You can turn your volume up, you can turn your volume down, tone up, tone down, and that is it. So it really is the basic bog standard bass, and is great for beginners because it is a great standard tone. But it's also great for any level of bass player as well. It's not just a beginner's bass because it's so simple. It's used by so many professionals because it just sounds great as a bass. You can even put flat wound strings on it as well and get that sort of Motowny sound. I've got rounds on this one at the moment because I prefer the sounds of rounds. I've got a little bit more brightness to them, but you can always turn that tone knob down and get a similar effect as well. It's a one pickup instrument that's so versatile and can do so much. It's just great as a bass really, and is great as a standard bass, and is great for beginners, and they're often really inexpensive as well, as basses are, to be honest. They're not incredibly expensive instruments compared to something like a saxophone or a trumpet or a piano. They're much more expensive than things like basses, and the P-bass is a great place to start, or a great place to just stay, because P-basses are great sounding basses and they're great on all sorts of records. So let's hear a playing example and you can make your judgment. So if the P-bass is just the standard bass then, is used on basically every bass recording you could possibly think of, then what would be the advantage of the jazz bass? This came out in 1959 by also Leo Fender, and again is a Fender design. But this time you've got two pickups, you've got a bridge pickup and a neck pickup, and a lot more tone options. This has obviously had loads of extra stuff done. It's got active and non-active circuits, but traditionally they're all passive, and it's a 5-string as well. But traditionally 4-string, but you've got some extra options. You've got, you know, you can merge the pickups together. You can just have bridge pickup, you can just have neck pickup. I have a preference for just the bridge pickup because it's that Jaco Pastorius sort of sound, and that's really, really iconic on a jazz bass, especially if it's a fretless as well, but this is a fretted one, of course. I do play a Stingray, which is a completely different thing, played by Leo Fender as well. I will talk a little bit more about that at the end of the video, but you know, P-bass, jazz bass. The jazz bass has got a bit more versatility, you could say. It spans a lot more different styles and is obviously great for jazz, hence the name jazz bass. If you're a jazz musician, probably get yourself a jazz bass, and this is definitely my favorite of the P-bass and the jazz bass. I just like the tonal options. They're great for reggae as well. There's a good reggae tone hack. If you go and look up Scotch bass lessons, you can see some great bass tone hacks there. I think the video is called Why the Jazz Bass Crushes Everything. I'll chuck it up there for you if you want to look at that, because it is a great, interesting video about the jazz bass. There's one about the P-bass too, so I'll put that there as well. But it's just such, again, a workhorse of an instrument, but it's got some more tonal varieties, and it's got that real sort of like honky bass sound, and it just punches a bit more, where the P-bass is sort of a bit more laid back and funky, you could say. You know, the jazz bass sort of sticks itself out a bit more, and you've got so many more options with it, I guess you can say. So here's an example of me playing it with just the bridge pickup on, because that is my preference for a jazz bass sound, and you know, just sort of general tone options. So what's the better bass then? The P bass or the jazz bass? The absolute two massive workhorses. And to this, there is actually no right answer. While the jazz bass is the newer and arguably in a lot of ways the better designed of the two, it's more versatile, it's got some extra features. Sometimes the P bass just works where the jazz bass doesn't. And again, it comes down to what you want to play and the sound you want. Whatever bass sounds better for you is the bass that you should go for ultimately. For me, the jazz bass sounds better with just the bridge pickup on, and that's the sound I like out of a jazz bass, and that's why I choose a jazz bass over a P bass, because I can't get that sound on a P bass. But the P bass sound is different to anything you can get on a jazz bass, that they really should be treated as two separate things, and they're for two separate jobs really. While you can bring a jazz bass to a typically P bass gig, it might not work in some cases, but again, depends on the player, depends on the style of music, and depends what sound concept you want. Especially for like if you're recording stuff, the P bass is really great, but either of these two things are so widely accepted by literally every bass player at like every recording studio out there. You really can't go wrong with picking either of them. So don't think, oh no, have I picked the wrong one? Just sort of realize what bass sound concept you like, and if it's someone playing a jazz bass and you really like that sound, go for a jazz bass. If not, go for a P bass. Or if you really can't decide between the two, flip a coin or just see which one's cheapest at the time and go for that one, because it can't hurt to get one of them. They are both incredible basses. You're not making the wrong decision by choosing one of them. But what about that Stingray? Well, this is a fretless Stingray. First released the Stingray in 1976, 10 years pretty much after the non-compete with Fender and CBS. It is again a one pickup instrument like the P bass, but it's sort of skewed more towards the bridge, and I can get that bridge pickup-y sound. Pretty simple again with the knobs compared to the jazz bass. There is an active EQ in every Stingray as well, apart from the Joe Dart signature ones, and it is just volume, treble, bass, and that's it. There's no tone knob, but these are all sort of boost, and since you've got that massive active EQ, there's so many tonal options with this. It's a one pickup instrument again, like the P bass, that's just so versatile and is such a workhorse. Now, I was talking about Jacko earlier, that's why I play a fretless, because it's great for that fretless sound. A fretless jazz would be more authentic, but I prefer the sound of a fretless Stingray. Again, it all comes down to that sound concept. This is a one pickup instrument, even though it looks like sort of two, they're wound together in series, and it's all one pickup, it's one unit. I get that really nice bridge pickup sound, but it's different enough to the Jacko sound that really sounds my own.
and I'm so used to that sound concept now. It's great for all kinds of funky things. It's great for all kinds of jazzy things. It works in rock and pop stuff as well, although I tend not to play that kind of music. So it really is the best bass for me. But out of the P bass and jazz bass, I'd be picking the jazz bass. But again, it's all down to sound, and still, I chose neither, and I chose the Stingray. You could sort of call this an oddball bass, like Bass Buzz does. If you want to go for one of these as well, I think there should be a lot more thought considered than the P bass and the jazz bass. If you want either of those, go get them, and perhaps get it first, and then maybe get one of these oddball basses. But the Stingray, again, is pretty much, if you want a Stingray, you can have a Stingray. They are great playing basses. They are just perhaps a little bit more pricey than most P basses and jazz basses. Again, if you like the sound, go for it. The Stingray is widely accepted as well. It's used by so many people, from Sting to Pino Palladino, just so many great bass players that play Stingrays. It's another great example of a great bass. A P bass, jazz bass, it's just whatever sound concept sounds best for you, and really whatever style of music you're playing. But that's been it for me, and I hope you've enjoyed. Like and subscribe, do all that kind of stuff, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.